Welcome to the first installment in our three-part webinar series. The first one is Extend the Value of BIM for AEC Professionals and Owners. So from an agenda perspective today, there are really four takeaways I want you to get. The first is there's tremendous value in BIM, particularly for owners, and it's part of the BIM lifecycle that we're missing out on. From the AEC community, there are deeper ways leveraging BIM that you can work closer and partner with your clients and generate additional revenue. From an owner's perspective, there is tremendous ROI, short and long term, that can be realized in BIM. And if you take the time to communicate that to the AEC community during the design, build, construct phase, you'll be able to realize that. The last thing I wanted for them to take away is Autodesk has come out with a tool called BIM 360 Ops. It is a very elegant, very powerful way to kind of bridge the gap in this chasm where BIM is kind of one thing from an AEC world and it's another thing from an owner's world. So a quick about myself. I'm our BIM for Owners evangelist here at IMAGINiT. I've been talking about BIM for FM for about 10 years. And when I started, I kind of felt like, you know, some prophet crying out in the desert, and nobody was listening to me. It's very interesting how lots of different technology are coming together, and we're going to show you that today, where owners are able to realize not only value on BIM today, but line it up for tomorrow. And I'm very interested to introduce Mark, who's going to tell you a little bit about himself.
Well, hello, everyone. So I'm Mark Mergenschroer. I've been with Autodesk a little over a year now. I come from the AEC industry after 23 years, really excited to be at Autodesk, work for the BIM 360 Ops team. My last several years in the AEC industry, I was a BIM manager for a large engineering firm that focused on facilities management. That allowed me to get to talk to a lot of different owners, a lot of different facilities team, and understand how they want to use their building commissioning data, how they want to use their MEP and architectural data. And then I started working on workflows to optimize that truly for owners and building lifecycle. So that's why I came to Autodesk. That's why I really have a passion for what I'm doing and looking forward to sharing some of the things we've learned. Working with Peter over the last year, I've known him for a couple years now. I really got to work closely with him for a year, and really excited about what the future holds for this team and for us.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark and I are having a lot of fun.
We are. We're probably going to have some unfortunate fun today.
So as we look at BIM, I want to turn it on its head. The value of BIM isn't during the design phase. The real value of BIM is during the owner phase, which I know sounds completely opposite, because BIM, as you think about it, is more of a design tool. And I'm going to go in kind of how I came to that, to talk about that. So traditionally, I used an outdated slide there. There's a stodgy guy looking his buildings on a drawing board. Let me get back to something more current. Here we go. Traditionally, from a workflow perspective, an owner wanted to build a building, right? And this has been going on for years, and a lot of you that are on this could tell me more about traditionally how buildings have been built. When an owner says, hey, I want to put a building together, he's got the architects and the different partners they're working with. They send some data back and forth. The architect then sends in data. The MEP engineer sends out data. The subcontractors usually don't actually have all the software that's necessary, which makes this traditional workflow a little messy. And what happens is this, where there's all sorts of information flowing around, and it's not very efficient. The piece that I want you to get here is forget about the inefficiency here. When I said earlier that the real value of BIM is in the owners, as this process is happening, valuable data is getting lost. And the irony is it's very valuable yet very simple data that we look at. As I look at it and I start trying to get AEC firms to talk to owners and vice versa, on my slide, I also have my title that I often call myself an AEC-O therapist. The whole BIM process, start to finish, gives everyone a headache. An architect, as you look at it, they traditionally have worked with the design and construction end of the client. They're not talking to facilities who would leverage BIM over time, right? As you start to get contractors involved, they got a headache because the architect's giving them more data. They've got to figure out how to do everything, and then the owner's asking them for an as-built, which is something else. The owners, I can tell you, are just frustrated. They're looking to get ready to go. They want to maintain their systems. They want to maintain value. But traditionally in an AEC process, it was very common that a month, a year after a building was done, a pallet was delivered with a bunch of paperwork to help this guy do his job, as it's supposed to be up for a year. And if you could get that information right away, it would be incredibly powerful. The other concept I want to talk about is, hey, what happens after handover? So what's really interesting, and I've got a guy here with two names on his shirt, the AEC world all of a sudden has realized, hey, there's valuable information in what we're doing because our owners are maintaining equipment. And if we could give them some information, it probably would be helpful. On the other side, the owners started to realize, specifically through BIM, there's the ability to get more information than was done in the past. And as I talk about this, it's kind of like chicken egg thing. Hey, they're both realizing there's value, but who should kind of drive the process? I'm going to tell you, the person that should drive the process at the end of the day is the owner, because the owner knows how they're going to use the data over time. So as we move along, and I kind of talked about the process changing, I want to specify that where it's moving and where Autodesk is going with the 360 platform is they're giving us this wonderful way to collaborate, which is working really well since most of us are at our homes right now, right? To put this information up in the cloud and to find a way to work together. And what I want to stress is all this does is mirror standard IT practices. IT's been doing this since the 80s and 90s. It's just recently that the design tools have caught up to where you can start to send information back and forth. And as you talk about standard IT processes, coming over here from an owner's perspective, the data that they're interested in, two things. One, what's an as-built, and two, what helps me manage my facility. And as we come here, we're worried about constructability, right? Feasibility, making sure what we're doing, are we running things efficiently? There are all sorts of value that can be added here. But as you think about it, it's more design data. And part of what needs to happen is you need to kind of have a handshake in the middle. So IT, in a standard process, will have a nomenclature for how things are named. And what's important is that there's a way to take this design data and bring it over to an owner. And the good news is we're well on our way there, and it's happening. And we don't need to learn. So I specify this standard here. When I talk to an IT department about this, they laugh at me because it's basic IT principles. To give you some more context, IMAGINiT does an annual survey every year of what we call the BIM and FM gap. And we're tracking how the AEC world is adopting BIM, how owners are adopting BIM, and seeing where the gaps are in all of this. And what we're seeing is that the AEC world continues to leverage BIM. There's more adoption, right? As we can look here, we're kind of at the laggards. Most people are using this. And heavily, BIM is helping people build things better, faster, and smarter. One of the things that's happening during this is all sorts of powerful information that's gained that could be very useful to an owner. And it's not being handed over to the owner most of the time. So that's kind of an area when I talk about there's potential for great change. From an owner's perspective, before I get to the data part, if I look at our survey the last 3 years, we added something in 2019, which I put over here by itself. So these are like, hey, owner, do you have an electronic system? So the different buzzwords, CMMS, IWMS, CAFM. standardized system to manage your space and your assets. And as you can see, most people are saying, hey, I've got some standard system versus other. Well, in 2019, we broke out Excel as part of other. This much of it was in Excel. And if you think about what you can do in Excel, you really can have a list of things. And if you're a facilities manager, what you're going to do is go around and have processes to fix things. Excel is not the place to manage a list like that. So number one, I'm not sure if they're really ready technology-wise. Number two, traditionally, if a university wants to build a building, the design and construction department will go out and engage with the AEC community, put things together. Facilities hasn't been involved in that discussion. Facilities needs to push to be involved in that discussion to say, hey, as you're putting that building together, you're doing all sorts of things. You're updating information, you're doing scans, you're putting together as-built. They're not pushing back hard enough to say, hey, can I have this data in an electronic format?
So how can we leverage all this? So for the AEC community, we're always looking at increased revenue streams. And Peter asked me to talk about this since I've only been out in industry for a little over years. You know, what's the short-term goals? What's the long-term goals for the win-win for everybody? And you know, creating a division to focus on facilities data within the community, within your firm, and focusing on the consulting, focusing on the data, focusing on how to hand that over for facilities to use in an easy way. Looking at that as an increased revenue stream, and then long-term, helping that facilities team maintain the data, organize the data, being that support there to help them through this BIM process and leverage what is needed to increase that revenue stream. And not only will this increase the revenue stream for the AEC community, but Peter, if we go to the next slide, increasing that investment for the owners. The owners need a win-win as well. And coming from the industry, sometimes we might forget about the owners in this. You've got to increase your revenue stream as well. So what if we could do a day one readiness? What if, as an AEC industry, we could package that data for a facilities turnover instead of just closeout documentation? You know, what if we could help you with reporting, help you with your preventive maintenance, help you with indoor wayfinding on that facility, just knowing where the assets are in a building before you ever take ownership of that building. That's what Peter and I are talking about. This is the value. And think about how long does it take you to get that closeout documentation or even just the preventive maintenance procedures for a new building or for a renovation? And then how long does it take you to get it into your CMMS? What's the cost of that? How long does it take your team to gather and collect all that data? What if we could have all of that data in the system before you ever take ownership of it? And so Peter, let's talk about how to improve the return on your investment.
So also, as you look at it, specifically here, I made 2 slides. When these guys were hanging out up here eating lunch, did you think that they think that there might be a CMMS then? I don't think we had computers when they were building the Empire State Building, or nowhere near the level that they are. Most buildings last a long time. So outside of the short-term ROI, there's a long-term ROI. And what BIM gives us, and the data around BIM gives us a record and a map that can be leveraged in all sorts of ways. So they're long-term benefits, and they're going to become even more and more powerful. So as computers become more powerful, and we talk about machine learning and all of this, and there's some of this today, we're going to hit the point where a facility manager for a university can do true predictive maintenance on their assets. From an IoT perspective, I see no reason why my blender should talk to my refrigerator, and I still can't get someone to explain that to me and why that would work. But what I do know is if I go back to that university example, imagine if all the HVAC units running on the roof had some sensors on them to indicate when there was too much vibration or there were current fluctuations that something were wrong, and they could do maintenance ahead of time. So there's great things that are coming. And then the other point that I want to make out is there's data in all these different data sets together. We talk about the smart building, the smart city, the smart this, the smart that. But there's one basic thing about IT. If IT has good data, they'll put together algorithms to be able to leverage that data. We haven't had good data from an IT perspective on facilities until recently. So you're going to see a boom of advances come out where you can kind of leverage this information. I'd like to tell you that this is all rocket science, having a better discussion as an AEC professional with your owner and vice versa. It's very simple. I'm going to go through 3 basic questions. I stole them from Chuck Meese at Autodesk, who I always give credit for. He did give me his approval. But question 1 is, hey, what data do you need? Okay, so from an AEC perspective, the guy with his name on his shirt, that's the guy you got to go talk to, not the VP of Design and Construction. You also got to find someone down in IT. And generally, those guys are hard to get because you want the coders that are really looking at the data. And a lot of them are kind of introverts. They're down there. They'd rather be with their computer and their numbers. But those are the people who need to be involved in this discussion as you're looking at a building about what data should you have. The second question is how are you going to collect it? This is really important as you think about it. So if you're an architect, you're sitting in front of a computer screen, right? You're designing in Revit and things are perfect. If you're in construction, you know nothing's perfect. You've got change orders, even though we've gotten much better with tools like Navisworks and things like clash detection, there's still room for improvement. So they're kind of working in a messy world. Data, though, is collected at different times. So as you talk about things, it might not be in a pristine architect world. It may. It might be, some of it might be in the construction process. Some of it may be done in the commissioning process. And as you talk about collecting that data, some of it might not be done with a technology tool. It might be that someone's putting up lights and the electrical contractor is sticking the lights up and you want to track the lights individually and you hand them a list of barcodes and a little drawing and say, hey, just tell me where these are so you can enter that into the system. But where that's collected is something you really need to think about because there are different parts and players in the process. The final thing we want to think about is how do we keep it up to date? And Mark often talks about how the AEC community gives either way too much information in a not very usable format to owners or way too little. And one of the ways to know how much data should be in a system is how you're going to keep it up to date. At the end of the day, this comes to a very complex term I use called where's my stuff? What generally an owner needs to know is basic information about the structure of the building, right? The where, and then the different assets in that space or people in those spaces over time. And then second point I want to bring in, once we've gathered core data elements here within this, and you start to build a data structure, there are ways to add things on through table joins, which is IT does regularly. So if I, for instance, works with an AEC firm and an owner, and the AEC said, hey, this is a train model 1, 2, 3, 4, and only supplied that information, we can go to train to get the preventative maintenance procedures. And they've got that data available electronically, and in most cases, we can pull it right into the system as kind of a table join. Also, as we talk about data, we're going to have to think about nomenclature, okay? So same data, different perspectives. So down here is an asset, which is the conference room table in our corporate office. And I can say certain things from a data perspective about this. Also, I can look at this from a Revit perspective and say, hey, here's the table, right? and we can go up here and drill down and show different information on the table. Likewise, we can pull it into our asset management system, and this is a picture coming from ops, and here's a list of assets in the corporate facility, and you'll see that right here is that conference table and gives us some high-level information. We can drill down into that and say, hey, classification, it's furniture. Ooh, it's got a location. Notice that 4, we're going to get to that in a second. But you can add additional information, which would be stored at this table level. We're just querying it up in different ways. I also can take this and look at it from a mapping perspective. So this is our corporate office. This is inside Apple Maps. It's running live. And I will not on this webinar and might on one in the future, I can track assets moving within the facility. Cool high-tech stuff that I thought was years out. It's doable today, but if you look at it, this is mapping data here. Here's kind of like a computer world, right? Here's Revit. It's the same thing, different nomenclature, different terms, but very, very powerful as you look at it from the flow, as I talked earlier, from how things happen.
Hey, Peter, go back
Yes,
to
sir.
that slide for a second. You're talking about high-tech computer stuff. What's that Mr. Potato Head in your corporate office there?
Oh, we're going to get to that later on.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
At least someone has a sense of humor on this team. So with that being said, it's my great pleasure to introduce Autodesk BIM 360 Ops. I've been working with Katie Murph and her team, of which Mark is part of. I've also had the opportunity to work with some folks at Apple, including Yuval Kozlovsky. And we're going to talk about Ops, what it is, and how you can leverage it from the data. So Ops is wonderful. It's built to be a simple system. So you know how I talked about that data being locked up? It provides a very powerful tool to get that AEC information over in the hands of an owner in an easy way to consume. So Ops was designed to work on a mobile device. So here it is on my little iPhone, and it's fat finger friendly. Most craft people that go and fix things, by the way, don't have, a dainty interface. They're more used to using their wrenches and their hammers. We can drill in and look at information about assets, and I can get a whole ton of information here, right? I can look at manufacturer, I can look at model, serial number. I can look at a checklist. Hey, here are things that need to be done, so I kind of used that example before of preventative maintenance. It's also got an end user interface, which I'm showing over here. It's very similar to the one over here. Ops has the ability, if we were over here looking at the asset, we wanted to drill into it, look in detail, it can drill into the model and show you what an asset looks like. And then the other thing, which we kind of talked about earlier, was this whole concept about, pulling mapping information in. So for those of you who are familiar, very Apple users, Apple, the blue dot kind of tells you where you are. Here's an example of where inside the system, this is an asset with a beacon on it. It's a mobile asset. It's moving around. And their asset was queried for, and it shows where you are on our map, and it can also tell you how to get there. And what's interesting about this, I did a pilot at our corporate office this fall, and I presented it at AU. And because I'm a wise guy, I used potato heads because I thought it would be kind of funny, which what Mark was doing. What I want to point out was when I did this, I thought we were years from this in terms of technology. I thought we were nowhere close. Not only was it something that we could do today, it was remarkably easy to fit up, put in place, because Autodesk had built the hooks from the Autodesk tools into Ops to get that rich data set over. And then they worked with Apple to provide tight integration with Apple's indoor mapping to create this capability. And I figured, hey, we're probably 5–10 years out from this. So we're going to switch now when we're going to talk about realizing the value of BIM for owners, and I'm going to hand things over to Mark. Just one thing, as we look at this, I want to point out. From an owner's perspective, they've got a list of things they need to do to take care of their facility. And they're going to have some type of data, so I got some complex drawing here to take a look about. But at the end of the day, it boils down to that information. And Mark's going to use examples coming from BIM 360 Ops to talk about these different use cases, which he touched on earlier, where you can leverage the data that's in BIM and the other Autodesk tools, pull that data into Ops, and use it to be more efficient. Okay, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Peter. So this is going to be just a really high level of what we can do with BIM 360 Ops. And what I want to talk about is I take the approach of a facility technician. You know, we can go talk to all different kinds of people, and they're really going to give us ideas of what does it take to be ready? What does it take to be ready to open a facility? But you go talk to that technician and how they're going to manage the opening of a building, how they're going to manage their workflows. That's what I really like to talk about. That's who I really like to talk to, because that makes an impact on the facility. Knowing where assets are, knowing where mobile assets are, knowing where the preventive maintenance is going to be, knowing what warranty items are, knowing where their O&M manuals are. All of this combines into being ready for day one. And the reason it's become such a passion of mine is, you know, this wasted time. Technicians looking for data that the AEC industry is capturing, but maybe not necessarily formatting in a way that facilities can use it. And so that's why I look at BIM 360 Ops as being able to use the construction process, include the facilities team in the AEC process from concept, just like you would a building commissioning agent. Include them early in the process so that you're ready, let's say at substantial completion, to turn over to your facilities team instead of them having to collect the data. So we start that by looking at assets and tracking assets. And Peter, if you'd move to the next slide, please. Being able to capture the construction team's data, being able to capture that facilities team data. But is capturing it just enough? Or is knowing exactly the nomenclature that facilities team is going to use, knowing what attributes to capture out of the model or to capture from the subcontractor or to capture from the building commissioning agent. How do we get there? How do we know? Where do we know? That I talk about a facilities data spec a lot, a needs analysis being done, talking to those facilities people so that we can use either the nomenclature that is on the design documentation. I think a lot of times, and Peter, you may want to talk to this here in a little bit, is we get so caught up in BIM language. In using the BIM language as part of our handover process for the assets. But one of the things that we seem to be missing out on is that technician with the wrenches and hammers actually a BIM technician, or is he a facilities technician that's working on equipment? Sometimes I think we get those two mixed up, and we anticipate that facilities technician that's going out with their greasy hands is going to open up this 3D model and look at that, versus if we get them quality data to do the maintenance in the field, we're going to get better data back to help us manage the overall aspect for the facilities team. So let's move on to the next slide.
And if I could add just one comment there, Mark. Sorry about that.
Okay.
There's another piece of information that's incredibly powerful. And we picked a bad example for this screenshot because the date's obviously way expired. But according to IFMA, the International Facility Management Association, well into the double-digit percentage, depending on which studies that you look at, of equipment that's under warranty is fixed by the maintenance team instead of calling the manufacturer in the first few years of a building life. So as we talk about different areas and concepts in this, adding warranty information is really, really, really low-hanging fruit, which has payback of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars from a facilities management use perspective. Back to you, Mark.
That's very true. You know, even knowing where the asset is located, how many times have you went and hunted for a control valve above the ceiling or a V box above the ceiling? You know, being able to bring that data from the construction side and truly know where these assets are adds such a real value. But here we go, preventive maintenance, knowing where your assets are for preventive maintenance, knowing what you need for preventive maintenance. But the key is the facilities team knowing what you need for facility maintenance. As Peter touched on earlier, the checklist over here on the right, where do you get those checklists? Are those manufacturers recommended preventive maintenance procedures, or are those owners recommended maintenance procedures? If you set those up differently than what that facility wants, then their preventive maintenance routines are wrong. So that goes all the way back to talking and discussing this. Also, collecting the preventive maintenance procedures in an Excel format. I know Peter talked about Excel, but how difficult is it to extract the correct preventive maintenance procedures from the O&M manuals and transpose them into a CMMS or into another Excel file and then upload them? So what if we changed our thought process just a little bit, get the routines, get the checklist in Excel format from the vendors so that we can make this air handling unit monthly preventive maintenance procedure. We can schedule it, we can create the repeat tickets, and we can associate those correct schedules with the correct assets all up front, and then have the facilities team overlook this instead of having to build this. Next slide, Peter. And so as we go along, indoor wayfinding. Now granted, some of these facilities, yes, but in a larger facility, being able to find your way around a large conference center, a large office building, a large healthcare complex, we can actually do that with BIM 360 Ops in our wayfinding. But what's also really nice is the center image here on the iPad. You can see where tickets are. You can understand what tickets are nearby and how to work those. So you can work those tickets in a cluster instead of having to go from one side of the building to the other side of the building and back to the other side of the building to do the work. How efficient does that make the technician? That goes back to the better data, better workflows, gets that building facility manager better data to help them manage. You can see on the left here, we're actually walking to the asset back there in the office, and then on the right is another ticket on the iPhone as well. And we can also look at different levels of the building. It's not just one level of the building. So let's talk about mobile assets. Do you have assets that move around your facility? Do you lose assets? Don't know where they are? Are they stored in the basement somewhere? They just got pushed down there because they need just a little bit of maintenance. So we at BIM 360 Ops are truly able to track, say, this workstation on wheels here that would move around a building that you need right now. In our real world scenario right now, how many tools are moving around these facilities that the healthcare community are needing to know exactly where they are and be using them? What if we could take a crowdsourcing approach, be able to see these assets in a movable fashion with time stamping, last seen locations, and navigational directions to that asset. This is really, as Peter said, he thought this was 5 years out. This is something that can be done right now with the iBeacons and with Apple Maps, in creating this for a more efficient workflow for your teams and your technicians. So let's move on to the next slide here. Oh, Mr. Potato Head.
Where I get to talk again, Mr. Potato Head. So to kind of talk about how easy this is, and Mark, one of the things you should help me, I used older beacons this fall when I did this. Do you know how old these are?
So I don't know. Yes, we've been using these beacons for 2 or 3 years. Yes.
So what I'm pointing at, so it's not modern, super modern technology. So we took this little beacon, put it in the back of Mr. Potato Head where you put the rest of his stuff, and I did a pilot to see how easy it is to set this up. So there's a process before this where we're going to cover in the following webinars, but at a high level, you link the model with, you register with Apple Indoor Mapping Program, and then you link the model, and then you set it up, and then you can track mobile assets. So in this case, Mr. Potato Head is Beacon Head 002, and I can see that he's here in the break room. You can see that there's a circle here, a green circle saying, hey, and what that tells us is where the technology is today, it's 3 to 5 meters accurate within 3 to 6. So right, we're going out here, this is a 3 to 5 meter radius. In this case, actually, I was over here with my iPhone because Danny in IT was helping me with something. But I looked, and here's Mr. Potato Head in the break room, and I went through this whole very serious presentation at AU where Ms. Potato Head was doing everything she was supposed to, but Mr. Potato Head was always fooling around. So here he is, in the break room at the table where he should be. And we did this example to say, hey, he was over here near the photocopier and we thought he was working. And as you can see, he was being a very effective employee. I also sent a letter to the director of HR and my CEO. At least they found it funny. I hope you guys find a little fun in this. I try to spice up my content.
So, Peter, did you just say it was simple enough for the director of facilities management at IMAGINiT to set this up?
This wasn't difficult. I took the beacons, I put them inside it, and I opened ops and I searched for them.
Okay. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly.
But literally, once it was set up, it was, well, I only tracked 4 assets, but it took 10 or 15 minutes to set them up.
Awesome. Awesome. So IoT, so we all have building automation systems in our buildings now, even in our houses. But what are we doing with all those alerts and where they're going? And so with ops, we can actually take an email from that automation system and bring it into ops and auto-generate a ticket for that fault or for that alert. That is where IoT is going. We don't have to have an API integration. It's a simple email configuration. And so Peter's going to talk a little bit more about IoT and where he thinks this is going and the value that this is truly going to bring.
So one of the interesting things that's happening, as I kind of mentioned IoT, and the devices are coming down in the cost to manufacture and they're becoming more valuable, you kind of need a map to put them on, so to speak, right? If you're going to have sensors, you need some type of electronic world for it to live in. So BIM conveniently gives us a very powerful 3-dimensional thing that we can drop in. And use cases that are there today are for tracking. We showed one. I'm working with another client where we put vibration sensors on equipment, and when they vibrate too much, it'll go off. We've done projects with temperature and humidity sensors. As this becomes more commonplace, it's going to become more and more powerful. And I go back to that example of, hey, if you're the facility manager in charge of a university and you'll have all those assets on a roof, wouldn't it be cool if it had a check engine light on it just like your car? Well, where we're going from a cost perspective as these come down, you'll be able to put them anywhere. And there'll be different use cases coming out again as technology kind of evolves. But one of the things that does is that it enables your facilities management team to get a trigger that's somehow attached to an asset so they can go deal with a problem quicker. And there are all sorts of capabilities there. Mark, I'm going to hand things back to you to kind of talk about reports.
Yep, so reporting is key. And being interactive and live data is key because day-old data, even 12-hour-old data can give us bad information in these times. So at Ops, for BIM 360 Ops, we've truly made it live and interactive. Everything you see in color right there is clickable and interactive, and you're able to format the graph. You're able to format it on your iPad, and then the value that this brings, if you go to the next slide, Peter, is heat mapping. Being able to take these graphs and actually turn them into a live map. And think of the value, being able to see, why do I have more tickets in this cluster than I do have the other buildings? And then what if we could categorize this? So think of, in healthcare, think of infection control maps, or even a COVID EVS map for cleaning, showing where we need to clean these in a map style format. What analytics can you do, and how valuable is this type of analytics for your staff in a graphical view for everyone to understand, not just the facilities team? And then we also do this on the web. So you just don't have to have the iOS device. We can actually bring this up on the web and show different people exactly what's going on in your facility in either a ticketing style or in a heat mapping analytics. And we're really truly trying to extend the value of BIM by creating the maps and bringing this approach of how can we help the facilities team get a better approach for maintaining the facility. So Peter, what are we going to ask? What's our question?
So we've got a challenge for you all and are going to give you some homework. And ask yourself the question, how you are going to extend the value of BIM, no matter what stakeholder, where you sit in the level of stakeholders of this. As we touched the tip of the iceberg, we showed a bunch of examples, but there's tremendous value, both short-term and long-term, in looking at this. And it's a way for more collaboration. And as I talk about it, from an AEC perspective, it's a potential revenue stream. From an owner's perspective, guys, if you can help them be more efficient, that's an easy sell. And they'd be happy to get an ROI. So day one, there are all sorts of studies too. Mark had talked about day one readiness, where a lot of new facilities, by the time the maintenance procedures for the equipment that needs to have preventive maintenance done on it is in the system, they've already missed their first cycle. And that, in some cases, can take years off the life of a piece of equipment, so it's extremely expensive. There's all sorts of benefits there.